And we are delivering growth deals in all parts of Scotland, many of which are improving town centres and other community assets.
Mr Speaker, Hamilton is a brilliant place to live and work, but the boarded-up shops on Quarry Street tell a story of their own. Can the Minister tell me what can this government do to support businesses across Hamilton and Clyde Valley and Scotland who have suffered so badly under the chaos and neglect of two governments, Conservative and SNP?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable member is absolutely correct, and I commend her for standing up for her town. In England, this Labour government has already delivered lower business rates for leisure, hospitality and retail, which can help the high street. And I'm sure every Scottish MP wants to see that policy replicated in Scotland. As we are discussing brilliant towns, it's timely to mention brilliant retail workers too, particularly at this time of year. That's why I'm supporting the Scottish Retail Consortium and USDA's Christmas campaign to encourage everyone to respect our shop workers at this particularly busy time of year.
Speaker, Ullapool in my constituency for far too long did not have a post office, had great inconvenience to local people. But recently, Tesco stepped into the breach and we have a highly successful post office in Tesco's in the middle of Ullapool. Can I recommend this procedure, this approach, in terms of regenerating town centres to the front bench opposite?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. We are delighted to receive representations of all sorts about how to improve our town centres, but we do know that they have suffered neglect for far too long, and as I say, I'm hoping that all Scottish MPs will have been lobbying for the kind of support to our leisure, hospitality and retail sector that this Labour government has already given south of the border.
John Lamell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 5.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I firstly pay tribute to the honourable gentleman, my predecessor. I know he will continue to represent his constituents assiduously from the backbenches. Both the Secretary of State and I will be working closely with the Department for Transport and the Scottish Government to make sure that cross-border connectivity remains a top priority for this Government.
Mr Speaker, extending the Borders Railway to Hoyk, Newcastleton and on to Carlisle will boost jobs, help the local economy and improve social mobility. The funding for the feasibility study was agreed by the last Conservative government with the SNP administration in Edinburgh. But the new Labour government seems to push this into the railway siding. So will the Minister ensure that the funding for the feasibility study is released as soon as possible?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The UK Government is fully committed to the Borderlands Growth Deal, which will deliver economic growth for the south of Scotland and beyond, a key mission of this Government. The Scotland Office continues to work with the Department for Transport, the Scottish Government and Borderlands partners on the next stage of the business case development for the Tweedbank-Carlisle corridor and feasibility options to extend Borders Railway. It is unfortunately ultimately in the hands of Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government to follow through on the delivery of this important project.
Secretary of State Andrew Bowen.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I echo the words of the Minister regarding her predecessor and indeed my predecessor as Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland and the work that he has done. One of the decisions taken by the previous government, of which I am most proud, was the halving of air passenger duty, which led to cheaper flights and increased routes across the United Kingdom. But with airlines already cutting back on routes as a result of their government's decision to hike APD, people who don't live within a few-hour train journey to London, such as Aberdeen, face higher fares and fewer options for travel. So how can they credibly claim to support better transport connectivity across the United Kingdom when those living outside the Central Belt, and I know Labour do need to be reminded that does exist, are being punished?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable gentleman will know that we face a climate emergency and indeed an economic emergency of his government's own making. We were faced with a £22 billion black hole, with Treasury reserves spent 3 times over in the first few months of the government. We've taken tough choices to try and deal with the economic inheritance we've received.
Frank McNally.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 6 and 12 together. We have reset the relationship with the Scottish Government and have met with the Deputy First Minister multiple times to discuss the autumn budget and other issues. From the moment my honourable friend the Chancellor stood up at this dispatch box to the moment she sat down, Scotland was better off by the tune of £4.9 billion in Barnett consequentials alone. Again, something the SNP voted against but will spend today. I encourage the Scottish Government to use that money to strengthen frontline services, bring down NHS waiting times and lift attainment in our schools. There are no more excuses. We ended austerity. It's time they followed.
Frank McNally.
Mr Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. A thriving retail, hospitality and leisure sector is critical to brand Scotland. Following the welcome decision in the budget to ensure 40% rates relief for RHL businesses in England, what guarantees, if any, has my right honourable friend had from the Scottish Government that the extra Barnett consequentials linked to non-domestic rates will be passed on at today's Scottish budget? And does he agree with me that any failure to do so would be deeply damaging to the sector?
Thank you to my honourable friend for that question. He is absolutely correct. The UK budget shows investment over decline, including investment directly in my honourable friend's constituency as part of the £200 million Towns Fund, as well as the biggest budget settlement in the history of devolution. He's also right that our hospitality businesses in particular need this rates relief more than ever. The Scottish Government should be using that budget to deliver growth and investment to help our high streets, and passing on these reliefs should be the bare minimum from the Scottish Government.
Irene Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We have delivered the biggest budget settlement to the Scottish Government in the history of devolution, with more than £4.9 billion, as you've heard today, of extra funding that can go to public services. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that there are no more excuses for the SNP and that Scots expect and deserve delivery and improvement to our public services?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Of course, I couldn't agree more. It's not just the £9 billion in Barnett consequentials, but all the other investment the UK Government made outside those Barnett consequentials. The Labour Government has delivered billions of pounds more for schools and hospitals in Scotland. Mr Speaker, it's more money than ever before, but the SNP MPs voted against it. They voted to deny Holyrood its biggest ever budget settlement by voting against the Finance Bill last week, but of course they will happily spend it in their budget today. They also voted against GB Energy in the SNP leader's own constituency. Given what we've read about the SNP's selection processes, I guess the SNP MPs seem keener to send themselves to Holyrood than billions of pounds of extra funding.
Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, I'm sure the pensioners in the Secretary of State's constituency are as relieved as those in Argyll, Bute and South Lochaber that the Scottish Government's budget will introduce a pension age winter heating payment for all Scottish pensioners. The SNP Government is doing the right thing by Scottish pensioners. So will he join me in urging the Labour Government here at Westminster to also do the right thing by the pensioners of England and Wales and give back to them their winter fuel allowance as well?
Mr Speaker, what the honourable gentleman has just proved is the winter fuel payment in Scotland is actually devolved.
The consequences of the budget was to remove £5 million of regeneration funding for Perth city centre. We got practically nothing from their levelling up fund, save this paltry £5 million that he is even taking away. Just what is it that UK Government has against the city of Perth?
Mr Speaker, no projects have been cancelled. The Perth deal is being under consideration by MHCLG and the Treasury. It hasn't been cancelled, it has been merely paused. But what I would say is that the honourable gentleman should speak to his colleagues in the Scottish Government, who have got £4.9 billion extra in Barnett consequentials to spend today, and perhaps he could even have a chat with some of his colleagues sitting next to him who seem happier in Holyrood than they are here.
Seamus Logan.
Question number 7, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know there is consensus right across this House on the enormous value of the hospice sector and the extraordinary work that they do, work which has been sadly undervalued for far too long. Support for the additional employer national insurance contributions will be allocated to departments, with the Barnett formula applying in the usual way for devolved governments. The rise does not begin until April, and will set out further details on the allocation of funding in due course.
Thank you. Good night. Seamus Logan.
Oh, Seamus. Very popular.
Mr Speaker, there are 45 hospices in Scotland. I can't be certain of that figure because so many of them are in dire financial circumstances. I think of Roxburgh House in Aberdeen, which provides services to my constituents and to other MPs in this Chamber's constituents. Another organisation that provides vital hospice care is the Marie Curie charity, which provides services in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and they also provide hospice at home care. They are facing a bill close to £3 million as a result of decisions by this government. So what does the Minister have to say in relation to help that can be provided to Marie Curie and other organisations?
Good question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the honourable gentleman will know, the pressures on hospice funding long predate the budget and relate to declining real terms funding from the Scottish Government. I note that nearly 5,000 members of the public have written to the Scottish Government recently to support calls from the Scottish Hospice Leadership Group for fair funding. Those calls might be answered this afternoon, where the SNP Government has to spend an extra £5 billion, secured by Scottish Labour MPs, voted against by SNP MPs and spent this afternoon by SNP ministers. Make it make sense.
Right, we now come to Prime Minister's questions. In room.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Order. What are these two members playing at? That is absolutely disgraceful for the member. We've started PMQs. Either come in early or at least wait. Please start reading the room. In room.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to welcome His Highness the Emir of the State of Qatar to the UK, and I look forward to discussions this afternoon on how we're strengthening our relationship and boosting trade and investment, including the announcement today of a £1 billion investment in our new clean energy partnership. Mr. Speaker, Sunday marked World AIDS Day, and we stand with all those that we have lost and those living with HIV today, and we will seek to end new cases of HIV in England by 2030. Mr. Speaker, can I also note that we're joined in the gallery today by Mandy Damari, mother of Emily, a British citizen still being held hostage in Gaza. I've met Mandy a number of times, and in my view, what she's going through is nothing short of torture. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
In room.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to concur with the comments the Prime Minister has just made. North Devon District Hospital is the most remotest hospital in mainland England. Its intensive care unit has only 6 beds, and it's almost 50 years old, and it serves a population of 165,000 people. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents that their hospital will receive the urgent funding that it's needed under the new hospital programme, so that they will not face over a 2-hour drive to the nearest trauma unit?
Mr. Speaker, the new hospital programme that we inherited was emblematic of the failures of the previous government, making promises with no plan to deliver on them. We are committed to delivery, including the North Devon Hospital. We're reviewing the programme to place it on a sustainable footing, and the Health Secretary will set out further details of the new delivery soon. And in the meantime, we continue to support trusts to develop their schemes. Thank you.
Olivia Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the swift and decisive action this government is taking to secure our borders after the party opposite lost control? After the party opposite lost control, Mr. Speaker. And in particular, can I welcome the world-first deal struck with Iraq last week to tackle smuggling gangs? Does the Prime Minister agree with me that international cooperation, shared intelligence and joint law enforcement is the best way to end the vile smuggling trade?
I thank my honourable friend. She's a superb champion for her constituents. And she's absolutely right. The previous government left a broken asylum system. We put a plan in place, the Border Security Command, backed by £150 million, 100 more NCA officers, and we're introducing counter-terrorist style powers. And my friend is right that our new international coordination, including the landmark Iraqi agreement. And the hard graft is already beginning to pay off, because 9,400 people who've no right to be here have been returned. That's a 30% increase on the numbers of last year. They promised to get the flights off the ground. We've got them off the ground.
We come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would like to pay tribute to Mandy Damari and her family for the strength that they have shown. And we on this side of the House, and I'm sure the whole House, continue to seek the speedy release of Emily Damari and the other hostages. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talks about immigration. I think it's probably a good time to remind him that he was the one writing letters asking us not to deport foreign criminals. And he and his party voted against every single measure that we put in place to try and limit immigration. But, Mr. Speaker, the question today is what has been on the lips of all Labour MPs, including, I believe, the Health Secretary yesterday. The Prime Minister knowingly appointed a convicted fraudster to be his Transport Secretary. What was he thinking?
Mr. Speaker, the previous Transport Secretary was right when further information came forward to resign. What a marked contrast to behaviour in the last 14 years. And she talks about immigration, record levels of immigration under the previous government, nearly 1 million. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one urging on the removal of the caps for work visas. She was thanking the previous Home Secretary for the work that was done. She championed it. She advocated it. Record numbers of immigration.
Mr. Speaker, he's obfuscating, but I'm going to keep him on the topic. He owes the House an explanation. He said that the former Transport Secretary was only asked to resign after further information came to light. What was that further information?
I'm not going to disclose private conversations. Further information came to light. The Justice Secretary resigned. As I say, what a marked contrast. But whilst she's obsessing with the Westminster issues, we're getting on with fixing the mess, fixing the foundations, that £22 billion black hole, our prisons bursting. Mr. Speaker, as we found out last week, nearly 1 million net migration numbers because of the Tory open borders policy.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not asking about migration. I'm asking about the former Transport Secretary. He never answers any questions. He never answers any questions. And it looks like he didn't ask his Transport Secretary any questions either. The truth is, he appointed a person convicted of fraud to the Cabinet. The first thing she did was bung hundreds of millions of pounds in pay rises to her trade union friends. Wasn't this a fraud on the British people?
No, Mr. Speaker, she says she's not talking about immigration. I'm not surprised. And I advise her and all of them not to talk about the economy or immigration for another 5 years.
Mr. Speaker, he can try and change the topic as much as he likes, but the public are watching. He owes them an explanation. The country needs conviction politicians, not politicians with convictions. Now on to an even bigger fraud. Now on to an even bigger fraud, the budget. Last week, the Prime Minister failed to repeat the Chancellor's pledge of no more borrowing and no more taxes. It is obvious that they are coming back for more. In his manifesto, he committed to making Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. Does he stand by his own pledge?
Mr. Speaker, I gently remind her that 2 of her predecessors had convictions for breaking the COVID rules. I'd also invite her to look at the OECD report of this morning, which has upgraded growth for next year and the year after, which now puts us on target to be the highest growing major economy in Europe in the next 2 years. She should welcome that.
Mr. Speaker, I saw the OECD report, and what it said was that they will be coming back for more taxes. And I think the whole House would have heard him fail to repeat his own pledge. He can't even repeat the pledges that he made just a few weeks ago. We are here to stop him from damaging the economy, and that is why we are
I want to hear the question. Can we burn off?
Mr. Speaker, they are laughing the same way they all laughed during the budget when they talked about raising NI. They have no idea what people out there are dealing with. And that is why yesterday we voted against his damaging jobs tax. Even former supporters, Chef Tom Kerridge, who endorsed Labour at the election, said that the budget was catastrophic. He built a real business employing young people, unlike his cabinet of trade union stooges, CV embellishers, and an actual fraudster. None of them have ever run a business. Why won't he listen to business who are saying his budget is catastrophic?
Mr. Speaker, I thought the scripted jokes were over, but we had another one about lectures about the economy from the party opposite. They broke the economy, mortgages through the roof, and a £22 billion black hole. And she talks about national insurance. She complains about the rise in national insurance week after week. But then 2 weeks ago, she says that she wouldn't reverse it. She signed trade deals, Mr. Speaker, that had farmers protesting in Whitehall. Now she pretends that she's their champion. She campaigned to remove the cap on migrant worker visas, and now she pretends she's furious about the open borders policy of the last government.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is the Prime Minister has discarded his own Labour leadership promises. He's dropped the 5 missions he said would define his government. He's ditched his pledge to make Britain the fastest-growing economy in the G7. We left office with UK the fastest-growing economy in the G7. And business is saying he has damaged the economy with his budget. Tomorrow he's going to have an emergency reset, Mr. Speaker, just 5 months into his premiership. But why should anyone believe a word he says?
Mr. Speaker, the only relaunch on that side of the House is the leadership bids of her rivals. And she obviously hasn't read the OECD report of this morning, the fastest growth in the next 2 years of any major economy in Europe. We're proud of that. And they should never be allowed to forget the damage they did to our country. They used Britain like some sort of mad scientist experiment. Open borders, unfunded tax cuts, neglected health service. And now, all the madness is still coming out. They say they should be back in office. They haven't listened, they haven't learned, and they certainly haven't changed. There's only one party that's driving this country forward, and that's this Labour government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, question 3, but who knows, next week I could be #1 in the charts. As the first MP this year to bring out a Christmas single, will the Prime Minister join me in thanking my musical collaborator, the hugely talented Mal Pope, and everyone involved with this year's Everyone Deserves hamper campaign that would deliver festive food to 1,500 homes across 5 constituencies in South Wales. Like our song says, there's a reason for the season, and everyone deserves a Christmas.
Well, I thank you for a question. There's obviously going to be some rivalry in the race for #1 by Christmas. I'm not going to be joining in that particular one. But I do thank her and Mal Pope for their campaigning. And I remember joining her in the summer, a few summers ago, on the work involving hampers, much needed by her constituents. And I know how much it means to them. Christmas is a time to think of others. And I do pay tribute to her and all those supporting those in need. And this government will always support the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I, for one, will be downloading the song of the Honourable Lady for Neath and Swansea East. Can I join the Prime Minister in his delight and also his support for Mani Damari, and our joint hope that we will see Emily and other hostages released as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly spoken about the need to restore and rebuild the public's trust in British politics. Now, we believe a crucial part of that is reforming our electoral system to make it fairer and more proportional. And so does a majority of the British public. And this House voted yesterday in favour of a bill for electoral reform put forward by my honourable friend, the member for Richmond Park. So will the Prime Minister find government time, make it available, so we can consider this bill on electoral reform and restore the public's trust in our politics?
Can I thank him for referencing Emily, because I think it is important that we all remember her, and I say the awful torture that her mother is going through, and that's the case for all of the other hostages. It's hard to imagine what it must be like for anybody with friends and family who are still being held hostage after all this time. Look, proportional representation is not our policy. We won't be making time for it. And I just gently say to him, he didn't do too badly under the system as it is.
Right, David. Well, I'm disappointed in that reply and hope he will reflect on Labour's own policy. But moving on to another pressing subject, Mr. Speaker, more than 3 million people have been stuck on NHS waiting lists for more than 18 weeks. That's probably the worst, most appalling legacy of the last Conservative government, and it needs to be fixed. But does the Prime Minister accept that we'll only get waiting lists down and keep them down if it's easier for everyone to see a GP when they need it? So when he publishes his milestones tomorrow, will he include a guarantee with a timetable so people will be able to see a GP within at least 7 days or 24 hours if it's urgent?
Yeah. Well, he's right to draw attention to the record of the last government on the NHS. Record waiting lists and record low confidence in the NHS. So in addition to the economy and immigration, they better not be talking about that for the next 5 years either. We will be driving this down. We've already begun that work to make sure we get those waiting lists down. And yes, of course, that does also include making sure there's better access to GPs and other measures that need to be taken. But that's a central driving mission of this government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that a significant number of members in this place are, regardless of class, women of a certain age, would the Prime Minister agree with me that when a woman of a certain age, or indeed any woman of any age from any background, says they have experienced sexual harassment or inappropriate behaviour, they should be listened to, supported and the perpetrator dealt with?
I certainly agree with that, and I think everybody across the House would. She's right, because, Mr. Speaker, one of the greatest barriers that women face when coming forward and reporting unacceptable behaviour in the workplace is having confidence that they will be taken seriously, and that requires all of us to put in place mechanisms and arrangements to make that possible. Everybody should be treated with dignity and respect, and I'm proud of the fact that the Employment Rights Bill that we're passing will strengthen protections from sexual harassment at work.
Robin Swan. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Friday the 13th is a date associated with bad things happening. Next Friday, the European Union's General Product Safety Regulations will apply in Northern Ireland, creating more costs and bureaucracy for English, Scottish and Welsh companies who want to do business in Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland consumers buying from them. Many businesses have already stopped supplying Northern Ireland. Haulage companies are unsure what is required of them. Online sales platforms are divided on the advice that they give. Mr. Speaker, a previous Prime Minister promised Northern Ireland businesses that if they were asked to complete additional paperwork, they should phone the Prime Minister and he would direct them to throw the form in the bin. What direct, tangible advice can the Prime Minister give to those businesses who want to continue supplying Northern Ireland?
Well, I thank him for that question. It is a serious issue, and the government is working closely with businesses to ensure that they are ready for the changes that he has identified, and we published more guidance, as he knows, yesterday to support them further. We will be keeping a close eye on the issue to help businesses trade freely across the whole of the United Kingdom. Thank you.
David Williams. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Stoke-on-Trent and Kidsgrove, we are proud of our beautiful historic buildings. However, many lay dormant and blight our proud towns. Can the Prime Minister please outline what steps this government is taking to bring historic buildings back into use, and will he make time to visit my constituency to see for himself our untapped potential?
Well, I thank him for raising this issue and certainly consider his kind invitation. Mr. Speaker, we will invest in heritage buildings, restoring pride and ensuring they serve the needs of local communities. The National Lottery Heritage Fund has awarded Stoke-on-Trent £250,000 to help preserve the city's heritage. Historic England is also funding emergency repairs at the iconic Wedgwood Institute and supporting Reform Heritage, whose office, I think, is based in my honourable friend's constituency, to employ staff dedicated to delivering heritage projects.
Pete Wishart. Speaker, today is the Scottish Budget, and inside it you will find provisions to reinstate the winter fuel payment to all of Scottish pensioners, something that he, of course, famously took away from nearly all of the UK pensioners, supported by Scottish Labour members of Parliament. But apparently, Scottish Labour are now in favour of winter fuel payments. So what's his advice to Labour MSPs? Is it to vote for the budget to ensure that Scottish pensioners get that single fuel payment, or is it to stick with his view and vote that budget down?
My advice to my team is to ensure the SNP are absolutely clear. We have given them the biggest settlement to Scotland this year under our budget. They now have the powers, they have the resources, they've got no more excuses for the failure to deliver.
Clive Efford. Speaker, a year ago today, this House defeated the then government over the contaminated blood scandal compensation scheme. This government's £11.8 billion set aside for that compensation scheme is welcome. But as victims die every week, there is concern about the pace of payments and the fact that rules are being changed behind closed doors in Whitehall without explanation, contradicting some of the recommendations of Sir Brian Langstaff. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that next week's meeting scheduled with the campaign groups representing the victims must represent the start of those infected and affected being involved in the process that they fought so hard for so long and too many died and failed to see?
Mr. Speaker, we are committed to acting on the findings of the infected blood inquiry and ensuring swift resolution and compensating in full. And that's why we announced £11.8 billion to compensate those who waited far too long for justice. And I'll happily make sure that he gets a meeting with the Paymaster General to discuss the issues he's raised.
Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everyday pensioners in my Leicester South constituency are emailing me with one word, and that word is frightened. Susan, who has pulmonary fibrosis, wrote, "During winter, I rarely go out as it is too cold for my lungs. I need to keep warm and I need to keep my heating on. The winter fuel payment was really helpful." She writes, "I want MPs to know that not all pensioners are millionaires or receive gifts from millionaires, nor do we all get the higher rate of pension. Susan is frightened she won't be able to keep her house warm this winter, and she is not alone. Does the Prime Minister realise how frightening it is for the 8,100 pensioners in my constituency who have lost their winter fuel payment fuel payment help? As the winter month starts to bite, will the Prime Minister come to Leicester to explain to Susan why he thinks this policy is not frightening?" Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, the #1 job of this government was to get our finances back in order after the mess that the last government made, including leaving a £22 billion black hole. We had to take tough choices. They say they want the benefits, but they can't say how they're going to pay for them. We do want to make sure that the most vulnerable pensioners do get the pension credit that they're entitled to. We're driving that up. But because we're stabilising the economy, we can commit to the triple lock. That's a £460 uplift in the pension next year. So every pensioner will be better off under a Labour government.
Andrew Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Middlewich Eastern Bypass will support the delivery of nearly 2,000 new homes, 6,500 jobs and 1.5 million square feet of employment land. The previous government, having first promised to fund it, dragged their feet, putting jobs and investment at risk. Mr. Speaker, we're approaching the season of goodwill. So can the Prime Minister give my constituents an early Christmas present and offer some certainty over this vital infrastructure project?
Mr. Speaker, we are committed to supporting drivers across the country, including by freezing fuel duty and investing £1.6 billion to maintain our roads. That's £500 million more than the previous year. I do know his constituents have waited years for certainty on this scheme. The project is currently going through an assessment and government process, and I'll make sure that he gets a meeting with the Roads Minister to discuss that.
Martin Wrigley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The major GP practice groups in my Newton Abbot constituency have written to me detailing their precarious finances. Planning for the year ahead, they're considering their options, including redundancies, handing back their contracts or bankruptcy, and they've stopped recruitment of GPs, resulting in fewer patient appointments. The Health Secretary has promised an increased funding allocation, but has yet to say when we will know how much this will be. Will the Prime Minister release this funding information and meet with me and the GPs to hear their precious first-hand?
Mr. Speaker, he's right to raise this. The Darzi report that we commissioned made clear that the NHS was broken by the previous government, and that's why we provided £22 billion of additional funding in the budget this year to start the work fixing our NHS. We do obviously value the vital work of GPs, and every year, as he knows, we consult with the sector about the services that they provide and the money they're entitled to in return. And we'll send that out. We will set that out in the usual way.
Thanks, McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Holly Gazzard was murdered by her boyfriend outside her workplace in Gloucester 10 years ago. Since then, her family have established the Holly Gazzard Trust, which educates young people on domestic abuse and stalking and keeps women safe with its Hollyguard app. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to Holly's family and the work of the Holly Gazzard Trust? And will he update the House on the steps that this government is taking to tackle violence against women and girls?
Mr. Speaker, a decade on, the thoughts, I'm sure, of the whole House remain with Holly's family and friends, and I do join him in commending the vital work of the Holly Gazzard Trust. In relation to the steps we're taking, we've got a mission to halve the levels of violence against women and girls within a decade. That is really tough to do. Nobody has ever committed to that before. I invite everybody across the House to join us in that. And that will include, amongst the steps we're taking, placing domestic abuse experts in 999 control rooms to make sure they're picked up early, launching a pilot of new domestic abuse protection orders, developing a national framework to track and target high-harm offenders, and strengthening stalking prevention orders. We will take other measures to make good on this commitment.
Graham Ledbetter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A waspy woman dies every 13 minutes. That's 2 since the Prime Minister took to the dispatch box today. That's 111 every day and nearly 17,000 since he took office. So can I ask the Prime Minister, how many more waspy women have to die before the government takes action to give them the financial redress and the justice that they are due?
Mr. Speaker, we are moving at pace on all relevant issues. We've passed the budget to provide the baseline for what we need, and we'll continue to do so.
Yuan Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local councils in my constituency of Earley and Woodley are facing significant financial pressures from SEND provision. Woking Borough, for example, has twice the level of SEND instance than the national average, yet historically the level of funding has not met the level of need, and this has left families and children waiting too long for help. The previous government's safety valve programme was only a sticking plaster, so I welcome this government's announcement today of additional SEND funding in mainstream schools. What more can this government do to make SEND funding sustainable?
I'm grateful to her for raising this. I think the 5th or 6th time SEND has been raised at PMQs. We did inherit a system neglected to the point of crisis by the last government, and so we'll deliver the change that's desperately needed. That means increased funding to the core schools budget by £2.3 billion, includes almost £1 billion more on high needs budgets. And today we're investing and announcing investment of £740 million in funding to create SEN units in mainstream schools which deliver specialist support, and I'm very pleased to be able to take that forward.
Kieran Miller.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, members across this House are deeply concerned that the Post Office are considering closing more than 100 branches across our communities. More than 3,000 people have signed a petition opposing the closure of Bexhill Post Office. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the government must ensure we protect vital Post Office services for all of our constituents?
Can I thank him for his question, and can I also recognise the campaigning of many, including himself, for local services that their constituents rely on. The Post Office is required to maintain a network of 11,500 branches and ensure that 99% of the UK population lives within 3 miles of a post office. Decisions obviously about individual branches are for the Post Office to take following consultation with local communities, but I'm happy to make sure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss this particular case.
Speaker, in my constituency of Darlington, it's full steam ahead to 2025, when our town celebrate the 200-year anniversary of the railways with a 9-month festival. We're proud of our industrial contribution, but many in my area have concerns about the future of our rail industry. What assurances can the PM offer that he will get our railways back on track?
Mr. Speaker, we are delivering on our commitment to bring railways back under public ownership, putting passengers first. And today we've announced that South Western Railway services will be the first to transfer into public ownership next year. So we can turn the page on decades of delay, fragmentation and failure.
Kirsty Blackman.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Veteran Anne Puckeridge is also in the gallery, and can I urge the Prime Minister to meet her to talk about her frozen pension? Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Daily Record reported that Scottish Labour MPs are very upset. Apparently this upset is caused by their Scottish leaders' diktat that they now have to support the very winter fuel payment that they voted against in this place. As the Prime Minister comforts his upset MPs, will he remind him that the only people with the right to be upset are the 900,000 Scottish pensioners who were left in the cold by Labour's cuts?
I work very closely with Scottish Labour in a harmonious way. We ran a fantastic campaign earlier this year, which is why she's sitting up there and not down here.
Leon Conlon.
Can I echo the words across the House in relation to Mandy Damari, who I also met with this week and is from Beckenham? Yesterday marked International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and I'm proud to be one of the disabled MPs in this House. As a sixth former, I became one of the youngest people in Britain to have a hip replacement, and I relied on a blue badge. Data released yesterday shows blue badge theft has more than quadrupled in the past 10 years. Will the Prime Minister back my campaign to tackle blue badge theft and ensure millions of disabled people can work, socialise and live an independent life?
Can I thank him for being a powerful voice for some of the most vulnerable in our society? Look, theft of a blue badge is appalling, depriving people of their independence and ability to travel with confidence. It has a real human impact every single time, and that's why we're working closely with local authorities to help them tackle fraud and misuse. And I'll make sure he has a meeting with the relevant minister to examine what more can be done.
Chris Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the question from the member for Aberdeen North, in the gallery today is Anne Puckeridge, who is a World War II veteran and an intense campaigner. She's flown over 5,000 miles from Canada to meet the Prime Minister to discuss the frozen pensions, a policy denying her and 500,000 Brits who live abroad a frozen pension. I'm sure Anne won't mind me saying that she will be 100 years old in a couple of days' time. Would the Prime Minister reconsider his decision, give Anne the best birthday present ever, and meet with her to discuss this issue?
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this issue. I think he will well know and understand that our position is, in fact, a continuation of the position under the last government.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister share my concern at the report by Audit Scotland, finding the Scottish Government has no clear plan for the NHS in Scotland? As a Scottish Labour MP, I'm delighted this Government is providing £4.9 billion extra for public services in Scotland. Isn't it time for the SNP ministers to get a grip and do better for patients in my constituency who are facing some of the longest waiting times for surgery in Scotland?
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this because waiting lists in Scotland are appalling. And that's why we make the argument. They now have the money, they've got the resources, no more excuses for poor delivery.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Point of order, Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to seek your advice on yesterday's debate that was a jobs tax on working people that aren't working people, or it depends on what the definition of working people is. The Exchequer Secretary claimed that the OBR stated there was a cover-up by the previous government. Today, on page 204 of Hansard, are the words used by the Minister where he said that the OBR used the word cover-up not once, but twice. I have since checked with the OBR. They have not said this, and I believe it is a creative use of words to suit a political narrative. Could the Speaker advise me on how I could bring the Minister to the House to correct the record?
The front bench want to, or I'll deal with it now. OK. Look, first of all, I'm grateful for the member giving notice of point of order. I understand he has notified the honourable member for Ealing North that he intended to refer to the matter in the chamber. Thank you for doing that. The Chair is not responsible for what ministers say in the chamber, and this has been historic. But he certainly has put the record straight, in his view, and I'm sure that the Treasury bench will have noted his remarks and therefore will reflect on it. Let me put it at that stage. Right. We now come to the 10-minute rule bill. Preet Kaur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to provide that where a public body collects data about ethnicity for the purpose of delivering public services, it must include specific Sikh and Jewish categories as options for a person's ethnic group and for connected purposes. Jews and Sikhs are in the unique position of being considered both ethnic and religious groups under the Equality Act 2010. Sikhs and Jews have been legally recognised as ethnic groups for over 40 years since the Mandela v Dowley case in 1983. The bill would address a fundamental absurdity in the fight against discrimination and inequality that we do not collect ethnicity data on Sikhs and Jews since laws on racial discrimination were first introduced nearly 60 years ago. The Women and Equality Select Committee were told in February 2018 that the government's race disparity audit had identified around 340 data sets across government, but found no data on Sikhs. The only data collected on Sikhs and Jews in more recent years is religious data. However, the quality of data collected by public bodies on religion compared to ethnicity is poor, patchy and incomplete. Religion data is never used by public bodies to make decisions for the purposes of delivering public services. It makes both Jews and Sikhs invisible to policymakers, therefore ignoring the inequality and discrimination both groups face. That is why a specific Jewish and Sikh ethnic category is needed, and that is what this bill will do. Mr. Speaker, this is a campaign to end the discrimination both communities face. I campaigned for a Sikh and Jewish ethnic tick box to be included in the 2021 census because we know public bodies have been instructed for over 30 years to use the design of the census ethnic groups question to design and deliver services in compliance with equalities legislation. As protected characteristics, you would expect that public bodies are instructed to routinely collect information on Sikhs and Jews, but they are not. As an Equalities Minister wrote to me last year, public bodies and decision makers who think that their decisions may affect discrimination, harassment or victimisation of Sikhs should ensure that their compliance with the duty includes considerations of Sikh ethnicity, but they don't, because people incorrectly argue and assume data collected on religion is a suitable substitute. Those people don't understand the existing practices. Religion data is rarely collected to a good standard. It excludes non-practising Sikhs and Jews and is not used by public bodies to monitor and reduce inequalities or provide public services, and the latter is key to this argument. Sikhs and Jews are missing from whole swathes of public data: education, housing, crime, health, criminal justice, the public sector workforce, the ethnicity pay gap. The proposal in this bill would allow public bodies to start systematically collecting data on Sikhs and Jews to address the discrimination and inequalities they face, especially as the government has made a commitment to require ethnicity pay gap reporting. In presenting this bill today, I have the support of a wide range of community organisations, including the Sikh Council, 112 UK Gurdwaras, and organisations, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust, and the Community Security Trust. I would like to provide the House with a few examples of why this bill is so important. The pandemic shone a harsh light on the inequalities between different ethnic groups. Many experts in public health now recognise that we were too slow to recognise that some ethnic groups were dying at a far higher rate than others. The Office of National Statistics belatedly started analysing COVID-related deaths data by religious group where data was available. A short-term exercise that has since been discontinued. It found that Sikhs died disproportionately from COVID, either after adjusting for region, population density, area deprivation, household composition, socioeconomic status, and a range of other economic indicators. Not only this, it showed that Sikhs were affected at a very different rate to other predominantly South Asian groups, meaning that analysis using the existing ethnic minority categories would fail to capture any of these inequalities. The Board of Deputies has also recognised these arguments. British Jews died at almost twice the rate of the rest of the population, with the higher prevalence of certain genetic conditions among Jewish people. Collecting better data will help public services profile and respond to the community better. For example, breast cancer in Ashkenazi women. Surely, to address health inequalities, we need to learn from the pandemic and collect accurate data to address outcomes for both these communities, given the huge evidence base. And to give just one example which highlights the absurdity of this system, the NHS Blood and Transplant Authority does not collect data on Sikh organ donors or Sikhs requiring an organ transplant, despite a policy of more than a decade of trying to encourage more Sikhs to become donors. They do not hold the single most important data point that would allow us to improve sign-up rates in this underrepresented group. It's simply shocking. And as Amanda Bowman, Vice President of the Board of Deputies, wrote last year, imagine you're sitting in a hospital, she said, waiting room, and have been asked to fill out a form which, among other questions, asks for your ethnicity. So which box do I tick? As David Baddiel, the author of Jews Don't Count, has said, it is othering and alienating that Jews do not have a distinct ethnic box to reflect their race. Since October the 7th, the British Jewish community have faced an appalling rise in anti-Semitic hate attacks. While the Home Office collects data on anti-Semitic hate crimes by religion, it doesn't on racially aggravated anti-Semitism. And this is despite racial hate crime outnumbering religiously aggravated hate crime by 10 to 1. There is therefore a serious risk that Jewish hate crimes are being undercounted by the Home Office because they do not have their own Jewish ethnic category. And in the first half of this year, the Community Security Trust found that the majority of anti-Semitic incidents they recorded consisted of anti-Jewish discourse linking the victim to Israel, Palestine, the Hamas terror attack, or the subsequent war. And according to the CPS prosecution guidance, hate targeting someone's real or perceived nationality or national origins, such as a link to Israel, would indicate a racially, not religiously aggravated offence. And the same goes for Sikhs, as has been documented in the APPG on British Sikhs report into anti-Sikh hate. Sikhs are the most visible minority in Britain, yet we do not collect data on racist anti-Sikh hate. The last government's hate crime action plan effectively ignored Sikh hate or the definition of anti-Sikh hate. Herein is the fundamental problem with consigning Sikhs and Jews to exercises focused on religious data and not ethnicity. Religion is not a mandatory field in terms of crime reporting standards set by the Home Office for police forces, apart from in religiously aggravated hate crime cases only. However, police forces are required to record ethnicity or EA codes using census categories where Sikhs and Jews do not exist, despite recognition in the Equality Act. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services produced at least 30 different reports since 2017 criticising police forces for the poor recording of data on the ethnicity of victims of crime. A final example, in October, the Chief Executive of UK Jewish Film Festival warned of the erasure of British Jewish culture from national cultural life by arts bodies, which are of course publicly funded. Benjamin Till, a BAFTA-nominated composer, told the Jewish Chronicle that the Arts Council doesn't allow Jewish people to identify as anything other than a religion, and insists it must accept that Jewishness is a cultural and an ethnic identity. And as the APPG on British Sikhs and Board of Deputies have warned, even on its own merits, using religious questions to capture data on our communities will increasingly become irrelevant. The percentage of Sikhs and Jews who identify with their ethnic group but do not practice their religion is growing. And as Britain becomes increasingly secular, we are failing to recognise how British Sikhs and Jews face discrimination in other ways. Ethnicity data can capture this in ways that religion data doesn't. And as the Board of Deputies has said, we are concerned that until this situation is rectified, many Jewish citizens will not feel fully counted. As a former Cabinet Member for Public Health and Protection in Sandwell Council, Sikhs and Jews are forgotten when it comes to the design of services because there is no ethnicity data on Jews and Sikhs to inform those decisions. In rare cases where we do have data, it exposes glaring inequalities. 2018, 5.3% of homeless deaths in London were Sikh versus 1.3% of the general population in the city. And 27% of Sikhs in the UK report someone in their family has an alcohol addiction. Good quality data saves lives. In the past few years, the Office for National Statistics has come to acknowledge the need to ensure the ethnicity standard reflects the diversity of the UK population. That surely means it is time to address this injustice facing Sikh and Jewish people. Whatever the future of ethnicity data collection, we must routinely be included in our own right. If you consider our legal status as ethnic groups, we should be included. If you consider the size of our populations, we should be included. And if you consider our contribution to Great Britain and society, we should be included. If you consider the specific forms of discrimination and inequalities we face, we should be included. What our communities are asking for is fairness and justice, to be counted as ethnic groups, given we have been recognised as such in law for over 40 years. And as David Baddiel has argued, identifying anti-Semitism as religious intolerance rather than racism downgrades its importance, which is what leads to Jews not counting. The same goes for Sikhs, and this is not just a rhetorical point. It is literally the case that regarding Sikhs and Jews as a religious category means we are not counted. We are not counted when we fill in a form in an NHS waiting room. We're not counted in the census, and local councils don't count us in the data they use to monitor and deliver services. Mr. Speaker, it's high time that changed, and so I urge members across the House to allow this bill to progress today. It's high time that public bodies ended this injustice, and as legislators, we must put this wrong right and support them to do that. Thank you.
That the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Ben Coleman, Jazz Atwell, John Pearce, David Pinto-Duchinsky, Joni Reid, Alex Sobel and myself.
What you do? Get out. Order, order. This is totally unacceptable. Members are really going to have to think about how they treat fellow members in this chamber. Preet Corgill.
Public Body Ethnicity Data Inclusion of Jewish and Sikh Categories Bill.
Second reading what day? Friday, the 7th of March. We now come to the motion in the name of the Leader of the Opposition on UK farming and inheritance tax. I inform the House that I have selected Amendment A, tabled in the name of the Prime Minister. I now call Shadow Secretary of State Victoria Atkins to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg to move the motion on the order paper. This government has driven farmers to despair. The hike in national insurance, the acceleration of delinked payments, the fertiliser tax, the double cab tax, the stalling of capital grants, the scrapping of the Rural Services Delivery Grant, and the slowing down of applications to farming schemes are all conspiring against our rural economy and the survival of British farms. Yet they've added a death tax to this, the family farm tax, which is seeing families across the United Kingdom worry about whether they will be able to hand on their farms to their children as generations have done before them. In the 36 days since Labour's budget, the Chancellor, the Secretary of State and the ministers have tried to justify their family farm tax that will break up family farms by claiming that only 500 farms will be affected each year. Awkwardly, the figures used by the Chancellor are contradicted by figures produced by DEFRA. The left hand doesn't know what the far left hand is doing, Mr. Speaker. And when this figure was queried by the NFU, the CLA, the TFA, the farmers across the United Kingdom and us Conservatives, ministers told us all rather patronisingly we didn't understand and that farmers should seek professional advice. Well, farmers have sought professional advice, and that professional advice has revealed just how badly wrong the non-economist Chancellor has got her numbers. I won't, please. in a moment. Since the budget, the Central Association of Agricultural Valuers has analysed the family farm tax and applied tax law and the realities of modern-day farming to it. This analysis has revealed that up to 75,000 individual owners of farming businesses could be affected over the coming generation, even before inflation. That is the equivalent of 5 times the government's figure of 500 farms affected in 2026-27. How could they have got this so wrong? Because this city-dwelling Chancellor, Secretary of State and Exchequer Secretary don't understand modern farming or the countryside. They have overlooked a major area of tax policy and forgotten to consider thousands of farmers. As the Exchequer Secretary has confirmed, they forgot to include one of the 3 routes to this relief in their calculations. They have not included BPR-only claims in their figures. This means that as many as 14,000 tenant farmers who cannot claim APR because they do not own the land on which they farm are absent from their calculations. And what is worse is that ministers don't actually know how many farmers are affected by this. The city-dwelling Chancellor and Secretary of State have also forgotten about the farmers who followed professional advice in years gone by and transferred their farms into companies or partnerships. These farmers will only claim BPR and so have been left out of these calculations. Again, ministers don't know how many farmers are in this position. And I am told, I will in a minute, and I am told by advisers that some farmers choose to use BPR only because it's easier in probate. Guess what? Yet again, ministers don't know how many farms are in this position and they have not been included. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman and then I'll give way to the honourable lady, because I've...
Can I commend the Shadow Minister very much for bringing this forward? And this, I think it's a collective decision for this debate in the House. Is one of my farmers and my constituents would very much support. In relation to the professional advice, I'm a member, declared an interest as a member of the Ulster Farmers Union. We've sought legal advice through the Ulster Farmers Union. Professional advice, it indicates that somewhere in the region of 65% of farmers in Northern Ireland that are small farmers, family farms, will be affected by this. So when it comes to understanding this, has Labour not really got it? Have no idea what's going on?
None, not a clue.
I thank my honourable friend for intervening, and the evidence is building again and again against the assurances that the Chancellor, the Secretary of State for DEFRA, Exchequer Secretary and the Farming Minister have given this House. And frankly, the farmers outside deserve better, but frankly, so do we as Members of Parliament. So I'm going to give way to the honourable lady there, and then I'm going to carry on with the calculations that have been got so wrong by this government.
I thank the right honourable member for giving way. The Shadow Secretary of State left a trail of destruction across the government. She is the Health Secretary who broke the NHS, the Prisons Minister who ran out of prison places, and the Treasury Minister who crashed the economy. No wonder her constituency majority crashed from 28 to 5,000. Does she not think it's time to apologise and support, for once, the government who is bringing back stability to British economy and farmers' profitability?
Order. I know members are jeering about reading. I know it used to be a rule when I came in the House that you shouldn't read. Both sides are doing it. Remember that. Sorry. I've got a point of order. You're a good friend, of course.
And this point of order is spontaneous, unlike that in
line over there.
It has. I am Mr. Spontaneity, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you're entirely right that many right honourable and honourable members read almost verbatim their speeches. But it is surely just rude and discourteous to this House to read a supposedly spontaneous intervention as if it's just come into the mind of the honourable lady, but she managed to have a typewriter and a printer in order to write down 2 pages of an intervention.
Well, what I can say is, as I expected, spontaneity didn't make it a point of order. Shall the Secretary of State?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the first female Prime Minister said, if they're going after you personally, it means you're winning the argument. But let me help the Honourable Lady. Let me help the Honourable Lady with the second set of calculations, which her Chancellor has got so wrong. Because the Chancellor's cockeyed accounting doesn't stop there. It in fact extends to the claim that farmers will be able to transfer £3 million tax-free. This is wrong. Only a few, in a very specific set of circumstances, will be able to claim this magic figure. To the jeers opposite, it is not available to widows. It is not available to people who are single. It is not available to people who own the farm with another relative. And their magic £3 million figure assumes that the surviving spouse lives some sort of monastic existence where they have no personal effects to pass on to their loved ones. As farmers from Sussex have asked, why are widows' families being targeted? Yes. A family wrote to me about their mother, who is a widow. They have calculated that they face an additional £200,000 in Labour's tax bill because their father died before the budget and so did not know to transfer his allowance. Now, we know that there are some Labour members of Parliament who have concerns. The Honourable Member for South West Norfolk, who represents over 500 farms, I don't know whether he's here today, has asked for assurances on the accuracy of figures being used by the government. Given this demolition of the Chancellor's figures by the CAAV and many others, will he vote for the family farms in his constituency, or will he toe the party line? And the CAAV's concern about the figures being peddled by the government is shared by the IFS, CBI Economics and even the OBR. But it isn't just about the numbers. It is the emotional toll that this terrible tax that the members opposite need to understand. The worry, the distress, the sense of betrayal felt by families which should stop ambitious Labour MPs in their tracks today before they parrot without question the figures given to them by their ministers. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady. I hope she doesn't fall into the category I've just described, and then I'll give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She talks about the figures. Would she accept the record of her government is leaving £300 million of the farming budget unspent, left in the Treasury coffers, not helping farmers?
May I thank her sincerely for raising that point, because she has, perhaps unwittingly, identified a contradiction in DEFRA's own claims. They talk about £300 million underspend, and then last week they were cancelling the very capital grants that farmers around the country have been investing in, saying that they've run out of money. Well, it can't be both ways, but perhaps this is yet another example of the Chancellor's and DEFRA Secretary's cockeyed accounting. I give way.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that what is quite frightening about this policy is that maybe they do know exactly what they're doing, but a bit like Animal Farm, they think everything should be collectivised?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, in fact, has a wonderful way with words, and he is asking a question that actually many members of rural communities up and down the United Kingdom are asking themselves, as in fact the wonderful presenter on BBC Radio Lincolnshire, Sean Dunderdale, asked the Prime Minister when he came on to do regional media a couple of weeks ago, what has the Prime Minister got against the people of Lincolnshire? I might ask, what has this Labour government got against the countryside? I'll give way to my honourable friend and neighbour, and then I'll make...
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and as she has said, the word betrayal is fitting, because pledges were given, both by the Secretary of State and by the Prime Minister long before the election, that these changes would not be made. So this is a...
He's a very experienced member of this House, and he knows he's meant to address the chair, not the front bench. Come on, John.
Mr. Speaker, I know that you, being a man of integrity and honour, will be as disappointed as I am that the government should promise one thing and then do the exact opposite.
May I thank my right honourable friend and friend, who, as I have the great pleasure to have, not just as a friend, but also as my Lincolnshire neighbour. He has absolutely put his finger on the point, so much so it is genuinely the next paragraph in my speech. And I can help him with the phrasing that should haunt some Labour MPs, because I suspect that they repeated this phrasing when they were up and down the market towns and villages in their constituencies. In the general election campaign, the Secretary of State described fears that Labour would impose this family farm tax as desperate nonsense. Now, Labour candidates will have repeated that line and assured the farming families in their constituencies that Labour would never treat rural communities in that way. Yet we know, within weeks, the Chancellor was planning to do exactly that. And since then, families across the country have been trying to work out how they pick up the pieces after Labour's family farm tax bomb. They will not forget. Our hard work and investment as a family has been wiped away in the stroke of a pen. A farmer from Derbyshire emailed me this week. My 60-year-old husband had a bleed on the brain in June and thankfully has made a full recovery. But I've never seen him so stressed. He doesn't know what to do. The honourable members representing seats in Derbyshire may wish to reflect on how they will respond to that. I will make some progress. A farmer from Northumberland has written to me as follows. We had to talk about which one of my parents are going to die first in front of them. He says, his words, Labour is destroying people's lives with this policy. Many of us are worried about the mental state of many within agriculture and are concerned that it may be the final straw for some. Now, in fairness, I will in a moment, in fairness, the honourable member for Hexham, who's in his place, has voiced concerns about whether his government is listening to ordinary people about this. Will he vote for his farmers, or will he toe the party line? I will give way, and then...
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Mr Speaker, as a farmer's wife, I understand the emotional impact which my right honourable friend is setting out so clearly. This is not just about the farmers who will be affected, but it is all the farmers who know they might be affected. This is a